I do want to get into what's happening, but let's focus on the poll a second here, because I think what's interesting is there a disconnect in your mind between the findings of the poll and the narrative that we're seeing play out? Because certainly there have been protests, there's been a documented rise in anti-Semitism and just sort of hate speech in general. That how does that correlate with 90 to 95% of Americans supporting Israel and supporting the U.S. stance on Israel in this case?
Well, I think I think the poll pretty much explains what we're seeing, right? If it's around 84, 85% to 15, there'll be more people with sympathetic for Palestinians over Hamas. But it's really about the young people who are in an information envelope of their own, who don't have, they really don't even have the experience of 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really go back to the history of the formation of Israel. They don't really have the experience of the 73 war, which obviously touched President Biden when he saw. They live in a very different information envelope, and those people who've been fueled by social media are most likely really to be supportive, against Israel. And we are seeing. So when I look at the poll, I say, well, how is it possible that we've got a policy here? It's got broad support, but when it's only got 50% of young people, then you can really see what the disconnect. You can see why you have the demonstrations. That's who's going to show up at demonstrations. It has the time, at which to show up at demonstrations. And so, a lot of the questions, look, these people who are over 65, they were demonstrating, college students back in their day.
Yeah. And
We'll,
probably
we'll,
on about this, I mean, you didn't have, maybe you always have the same disinformation loop, but it does seem to be perhaps more exaggerated now with regard to the dichotomy in views between the generations.
yeah, I'm surprised. There was a book that made a big impact on me when I was in college called Rebellion in the University, which basically traced people through the various ages, and that rebellion has been typical at the university. But we are seeing something very different. A lot of these wishy-washy statements out of university presidents, and I think a lot of the issues coming up, it shows that they know that their constituency is divided, and so they're acting differently than if their constituency wasn't divided. And they felt their constituency wasn't divided over George Floyd, and so they were very affirmative and out there with their statements. But their constituency is divided, and I think that's the interesting thing. I've rarely seen an issue that is more generationally focused than party focused in the last few years.